Oh, hello. Today, we're going to do another knitting hot takes video. This is the one that is specifically about size inclusivity. I am still on Stockinette Island on this tee, and yeah, you guys liked that first video a lot more than I thought you would. This is a book channel, so whenever I do something kind of for me and do a knitting video, I'm always like, I'm guessing not a ton of people will watch this, but you guys actually like that one. So we'll keep on pressing on to part 2 of this little series, which is talking about size inclusivity. So this is somewhat of a landmine field. I acknowledge that going into it. And I feel okay talking about it because I am a fat person. I have always been a fat person. Even when I had extreme ED behaviors in my youth, I could never get below, I think, a size 10, no matter how hard I tried. So I am naturally a big girl. Okay. So some of this, the size inclusivity discourse, people have to like tiptoe around certain things, but I feel like I have at least some experiential authority to talk about my opinions on this. I should note that I'm going to use the terms fat in this video or plus size. I personally prefer fat because I think it helps destigmatize what is just an adjective and not a moral assessment. But fat, plus size, bigger bodied, whatever, I'll use those interchangeably. I'm fine identifying as fat because I am. Yeah, okay, so I've got my notes up on the screen. I've been taking these over the last little while. So first of all, I want to start by saying that this is a topic that both is and is not that deep. That is pretty common with a lot of online discourse, that in some sense, you know what? It's not that deep. We're talking about size inclusivity in a niche fiber arts community. We're talking about size inclusivity in a group of people who are making their own clothes, which is rad. And in some sense, it's not that deep, right? Like, we are missing every milestone we need to prevent the world from having its climate irreversibly changed. We have multiple genocides happening right now across the world. We, here in the US, have our neighbors being plucked off of the streets for daring to be in public while not white. So we, in some sense, like, it's not that deep. We've got bigger problems on our hands. Just because of all of that, it doesn't mean that it's also not kind of actually that deep. Because as I was talking about in the previous video, culture is upstream of politics. And when I say politics, I don't just mean partisan politics. I mean like the body politic, like how we live together, who gets what, how much of it do they get, and how do we determine who gets it? Like those kind of like bigger picture political things are a result of culture. So the fact that we have an opportunity in our little neck of the internet / the world to influence culture in a positive way, I think, you gotta take the wins where you can. And we are in this moment experiencing a backlash to the kind of wave of body positivity, or even better, body neutrality, that we saw, about a decade ago and has been tapering off. We're seeing a backlash to that for very obvious reasons that are correlated with the rise of alt-right movements across the world. Like, there's a reason why there is a rise of the trad wife, a rise of people wanting to disenfranchise women again in the US and in different parts of Europe, a rise of Y2K body standards, including the rampant EDs of that era. Anyway, it both is and isn't that deep. I think that I'm not gonna go fully into the ways that it is that deep. If you are interested, there's a lot of great books out there. This is a book channel. I would say if I were gonna give you one recommendation, I would say Fearing the Black Body, Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. This is a very accessible history that I recommend. It, I think, talks about ways that, at least specifically in America, I can tell you that this was resonant with my experience of being fat in America and the underlying things that go into fat phobia in America. I think it also is probably pretty applicable for Europe, but I think this is an accessible history that talks about the ties of fat phobia to ties of being otherized for racial reasons. Yeah, that's another, I know it's controversial to say, I am so thankful that I've spent so much of my life as a fat person, because I think it has made it much easier for me to deconstruct some parts of my white privilege as a white lady, because I never got to experience the full white privilege of being a conventionally attractive thin little white lady. So it is very tied. I really recommend this. It's been I think it's probably been 5 years since I've read this, so I'm due for a reread, but I remember thinking this was really well done and very accessible. Two that I think are less accessible in terms of their style of writing, but are also good. A Cultural History of Obesity by Sandra L. Gilman. And then I read this one recently. This is more of a philosophical kind of approach. Belly of the Beast, The Politics of Anti-Fatness as Anti-Blackness by Deshaun L. Harrison. This is a masked person who wrote this, so it also kind of gives some of that point of view. A lot of this discussion will be centered around women and femme people, because that is me. Anyway, so I'm gonna kind of leave it there in terms of going that deep, but all that to say, two things can be true at once. We can care about more than one thing at a time. So that's kind of my mindset coming into this conversation. So then, honestly, this screen is too small. I can't read it from here. I'm gonna go grab my tablet so that I am not straining my eyes. I'm getting old, guys. I'm still in my 30s, but I'm staring down the barrel of 40 and my sight is going. Better screen has been acquired. So my baseline here, I have a foundational moral reason to care about size inclusivity, in the sense that I want as many people as possible to be included. I think one thing to clarify is that full inclusion is not possible, because there are always, this is sort of the bean soup theory, there are always some use cases that are not going to be addressed. So here, for example, if you are a person who has a limb that is missing or is a drastically different size than your other limb, you are unlikely to find a pattern that is going to have different sleeve instructions with that difference in mind. You might have a pattern that has both long and short sleeve instructions in it, which might accommodate for that, but I would submit that most pattern designers are not including that with that difference in mind. You can also get into like children's sizes in this. Should every pattern address, a full age range in it? I don't think it is possible for every difference to be accounted for. However, my kind of moral reasoning here is that you can and should make good faith efforts to cover as many as you reasonably can in your intended audience or intended size coverage for a knitting pattern. I will say at this point, a lot of the anti-inclusivity arguments I see include a lot of hand-wringing over the state of fat people existing. I certainly, as somebody who makes social media content, I certainly experience that. It is, not funny, it's not quite the right word, but when I get comments sometimes of like, you are clearly not healthy, like, like really trying to give it to me on the like faux concern for my health from like why they're commenting on my fatness. I do secretly kind of love being able to be like, you are correct. My fatness is a symptom of an autoimmune condition that nearly killed me in 2020. So yes, you have correctly assessed that I am not a healthy person. However, you're saying that I am unhealthy because of my fatness, and I can tell you my fatness is a symptom of my lack of underlying normal health. So that is the main thing I see people bringing up as a moral argument against inclusivity, is that it's basically giving fat people an excuse to continue to not be compliant and to not bring their bodies into a size that they find more aesthetically or morally palatable. I will just say that like fat people exist. Fat people, and you hate their bodies, the people who are saying this. So like, why are you wanting to deprive them of opportunities to have more clothing to cover it up? Like I have to wear something unless I'm gonna go to a nudist colony. So like, what's the problem with me covering it up in the meantime if it's so offensive to you? This is the same like people who shame fat people for going to the gym and the whole like catch-22. The point of it is there's a lot of moral posturing around the evilness of fatness and like under health concern trolling. And I guess I just want to say, like, I reject that as a premise. Like, people are not genuinely concerned about most people's health when they make those comments. It is a cover, an attempt at a moral counter argument or cover for not including people. And I guess I'm just saying, like, I reject that. From strangers on the internet, I reject that you are genuinely that concerned about other people's health and bodies. So in my opinion, those lines of argument are an attempt to get out of a shared moral responsibility to be inclusive of other people. So that's my kind of like underlying moral premise of why I think inclusivity is good. I'm going to introduce an analogy at this point that I want to be careful with, because I want to be really clear this is not a one-to-one. This is just me trying to find something that in terms of what to do about better inclusivity, I think is really similar. So I want to be clear that I am not saying that the underlying structural reasons of why these inclusivity issues exist, it's not one-to-one, though they are related, as I talked about previously. But I think a really good analogy for this is in makeup, found like a skin product color coverage in different ranges. So let's say concealer for the sake of this. Not having inclusivity in your sizing to me is very analogous to makeup companies not providing an inclusive shade range. I also like this as an analogy because I am on the extreme ends, or I am on the excluded ends in the opposite directions of these two situations. So in sizing and in knitting patterns, I am excluded often because I am too big for some designers. But in the color, so like I am too far in the negative direction. In concealer world, I am too far in the positive direction. So the equivalent of like if somebody is smaller than a size range, it's like, okay, in that construct, thinness is good, but too much thinness is not, it's too much. In this construct, whiteness is good, or like light skin is good, but too light is not, is too much. So in both of those cases, like we have this kind of theoretical group in the middle. Theoretical is an emphasis here because in both of these analogies, that middle is actually not really the middle. But we have this middle that's catered to, and then people who are on the outliers on either end of a spectrum, not included, and then told to shut up and take it if they complain about it. So I will use this analogy throughout, but I wanted to set that up now. So let's talk about the economic argument, or the like functional utility argument. So from a business perspective, size inclusivity I think is good because if nothing else, it gives you the appearance of caring about marginalized people in a group. So you may not give a flying crap about fat people, but if you have an inclusive range, you have ticked a box that gets you the appearance of caring. So you're getting points for that in terms of like when people do pattern roundups or when they recommend patterns. You've met the appearance of caring. Hopefully all of this, I'm assuming, I hope people actually care, but even if they don't, like, I don't really care about your heart. I care about what you do. I care about your impact, not your intention. So even if you have bad intentions, you get the benefit of the doubt on your intentions by being inclusive. Being inclusive also takes minimal additional effort that then substantially expands your addressable market of people who can buy your patterns. So this was something when I first got into knitting and sewing that I was like, oh, is it like that much hard? It's probably like a lot harder to accommodate bigger sizes. Knitting this was something that was really helpful to me. I saw Rebecca Clow do a Q&A about being a designer at some point, and she talked about how, like, I don't know if she was surprised, but she basically was like, yeah, it's not that hard to have additional grading on these sizes. It is not that much extra work. Really, you probably have to pay some more, so that is, you know, potentially additional cost if you have a professional tech editor. And then it is a little more coordination work on your test knits if you have more sizes. But the relative amount of effort to expanding your market is really solid for knitting patterns. Universal Standard is a brand who, like, their whole thing is trying to make clothes that fit, I think, 99% of all bodies. And they talk about here, at least in the US, the average woman, or the average woman is a size 18, which is a 47 to 49 inch bust, somewhere around there. That's the average. So if that's the average, you can then do kind of the bell curve math to figure out you're very much expanding your market if roughly half of people are bigger than a 47 to 49 inch bust and half are smaller. Whereas most brands, again, in the US, put their medium at about 36 to 38 inches. So if you treat that as the midway point, then you have a much smaller addressable market for your size grading. Bringing in our concealer analogy again, there is this assumption that most people are kind of like a medium beige, like that is because that's the midpoint of shades, that's the half are lighter, half are darker. That is simply not the case. Like, humans come in a variety of different sizes and they come in a lot of variety of different colors. And the idea that people at the darkest and lightest end of the concealer range are really small percentages is just erroneous in its assumption. So all that to say, adding additional sizing to your knitting pattern is a great bang for buck of investment from a pattern designer. You're not having to invest that much more money and time to be able to dramatically expand the number of people who can make your garment. And then in addition to that, the more fit options you have, so if as a part of your strategy, we'll talk more about this, but if you're going to include fit options in terms of like bust starts or different kinds of waist shaping, etc., you're also expanding your value to the pattern, which makes it a more attractive pattern to your consumer. So you are essentially improving your value for money by including those options, which again, in a sea of $7, $8 patterns, if I see one that has shaping options that is $8, whereas I see one that doesn't have those options that's $7, I think the $8 is a better, even though it's maybe $1 more, it's a better value for money. So it helps you make a kind of, even if you're not explicitly saying that, there's an implicit marketing benefit to doing that. And then from the consumer end, you get the appearance of moral solidarity and performativity if you support size inclusive designers. So again, I'm not really trying to judge people's intentions, I'm just looking at their actions. But if you care about those kinds of appearances, you get the benefit of doing that by supporting an inclusive designer. It's easier to pitch a pattern as being for a group knit. If you have an in-person or online knitting group that you're a part of, you have a better argument to pick a pattern if it is inclusive. Again, you get better value for money, like I was talking about earlier, because if you have more options, not only if there are fit options, but also just in terms of ease. Like if you are, let's say that you're kind of a typical size large, that in most stores in the US, that'd be like 40 to 42 inch bust. If you want 20 inches of positive ease on a garment, it benefits you to have a wider range of size options to go up a lot more in terms of the amount of ease you can include. So even if you don't have extensive fit options, like modifications, even just having an expanded size range is a better value for money in terms of giving your customers flexibility in what they choose to knit. And then this is something that people often talk about, and I really do find it to be true. People who take size inclusivity seriously, I find in general, have better written and better fitting patterns. Not always, definitely not always, but caring about size inclusivity indicates typically that you give at least somewhat of a shit about how well a pattern fits, and therefore you're more likely to have a high quality pattern coming out of it. So as a consumer, I see fit options, I see an extended size range. I have a decent indication from that this is likely a well graded and fitting pattern, or it's more likely to be a well fitting and graded pattern. Not always, and we will talk about that whenever I get to my knitting hot takes specific designer discussion. But all that to say, those are the moral, economic, and political arguments about why this matters. Now, with all that being said, how do I define size inclusivity, and what are my hot takes around that? After talking for like 20 minutes. What was I saying? Okay, yeah, what is size inclusivity? So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm gonna go with, you need to do two things in order to be size inclusive. In my book, in my opinion, you need to have size that are graded to accommodate the Craft Yarn Council's standard sizing range. They go from extra small to 5X, and honestly, one of my hot takes is I don't think that this is an inclusive enough range that encompasses 28 to 62 inches of your bust circumference or 71 to 158 centimeters. I think that seems to be the standard that most people are rallying around, and while I don't think it's perfect, I think it is, good enough. So we'll say that to me, if you hit those ranges, I would consider you to be size inclusive. And then if you have test knit practices that are inclusive in the sense that you give your testers enough time to complete a full garment within a testing window. I don't think we can get too prescriptive about what that looks like, but the spirit of this is that if you are asking somebody to knit a full cable knit sweater in a 62-inch bust circumference, you're not giving them 5 weeks to do it. You are giving them, 12, 14 weeks to accomplish that. That to me constitutes size inclusivity. And guys, that's it. To me, if you hit those two things, I think you can be said to be hitting the minimum of what size inclusivity is. Not really that much of an ask. The potential places where people push back is one, you potentially do have to pay more if you have a professional tech editor. You may have to pay more if you have additional sizes. So there might be an increased out-of-pocket cost there. Though if you are a small enough designer, you may be doing that yourself. So that probably would be time from yourself. And then coordination to run a test knit for that length of time for an additional number of people doesn't require additional coordination and time. You also then need to be able to plan in advance. So if you get an idea and you want to get it out tomorrow, you can't if you are being size inclusive. At least not, I guess you could release it and then say, hey, test knitting is in progress, but I wouldn't buy that pattern even if I were, a 29-inch bust circumference. I would not buy a pattern that had not been test knit. So you're adding some time to your test knitting window. Okay, I'll just leave it there. To me, those are the boundaries of inclusivity. Very low barrier to entry to meet those two things. I'll start now getting into some of my hot takes around that. One is that I do not care about any of this for free patterns. To me, if you are sharing a pattern for free and it comes in one size, that is fine. You are essentially making your self draft and the notes for it available to everyone. So that's fine. I think people do not have a responsibility to grade and test self-drafted patterns that they're just sharing their notes for, basically. So that's an exception. And then I will also say, I think something that has emerged as an acceptable practice that I think is fine is that it can sometimes be harder to find test knitters in larger sizes, because if your full garment has 300 stitches in the body versus the smallest size has 150 stitches, that's twice as much work, twice as much yarn. There are just, for understandable reasons, there are fewer large knitters who are willing to commit that amount of time to testing a pattern, unless it's somebody who is a friend or they really like their designs, or I'm a fast knitter, so it's less of a risk to me. But there can be barriers to finding enough test knitters at all sizes. So I think a perfectly acceptable workaround that has emerged is that you can release the pattern, state clearly which ones have not been test knit, and then offer the pattern for free to somebody who wants to knit that size so that it can get a test knit. Like, that is a perfectly reasonable workaround for that, is to clearly communicate what has not been test knit and to offer an avenue for it to get test knit. Like, I think that is fine. Other hot takes, as I was talking about, I do not think that the Council of Craft Yarn, whatever that is, I don't think their range is inclusive enough. At least I think that they do a pretty good job on the lower end, though I do think they probably could stand to go down at least one more size, though I do acknowledge that at that point you are getting into overlap with child sizing. So yeah, that, I guess I'm not in that community, so I won't speak to that. But in terms of the upper sizes, Universal Standard, I think their largest size is a 78-inch bust, but I think a 70-inch upper limit would be probably closer to hitting 99% of all knitters or all people. So my hot take is I think that standard that I'm fine with. I think it's good enough for now. I do think eventually should go up. So that's a hot take. Yeah, I was saying I think it should go from, I think 26 to 70 inches would be probably a good range. Another hot take is that one thing about the inclusive sizing is that your inclusivity does also need to include a finished garment that includes enough ease based on what you have prescribed in the pattern, which is often where people miss the mark on inclusivity. So they'll have a finished object that goes up to 62 inches, but if the intended ease is 5 inches, that really means the biggest size should be a 67-inch garment. And I would love to hear from people if I'm just not thinking about this right. I just think that we should stop having an official ease recommendation, because I think it throws people off and it keeps them from actually analyzing the garment to figure out how they want it to fit. I think you should have models in a variety of sizes with a variety amount of ease. Tell people, like, in these photos, here is the ease, and let people pick for themselves. Because while in the example I gave, if you are recommending a 5-inch, if you're recommending 5 inches of positive ease in a garment and your biggest size goes to 62, to be inclusive, you should, if you are including that ease recommendation, go up to 67 inches. However, as a fat person, I can tell you that I pretty much never want that much positive ease. I like my garments to be 0 to 2 inches of positive ease where possible, unless I'm specifically going for a very cozy look. And that's because on bigger bodies, at least in my experience and how I like to wear things can quickly start looking like it's less like, oh, I'm a small little girl in this oversized thing, and it's more like I'm wearing a bag. So personally, I don't know a ton of fat knitters or plus size knitters who love a ton of positive ease. They do exist, okay? So that's why if you're gonna include recommended ease, you gotta put your money where your mouth is. But I would be fine if people just don't include a recommended ease and then just show what different options look like and let people figure it out for themselves. And then, okay, yeah, my last hot take here is that, and I don't think this is that hot of a take, but I think that the whole XXS to 5XL range is absolutely meaningless and should be abolished. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure what it's like in other countries, but in the US, we have these arbitrary numbers that people assign to women's clothing that make no sense. They vary so much from brand to brand, and in this case from designer to designer. None of it makes any sense. I think that you should either just have sequential numbering or lettering, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or A, B, C, D, E, or even better, make your size numbers the actual finished circumference of the garment. That would be ideal. And it also, I mean, like, there's the side benefit of it, of like, it is kind of absurd for there to be 5 X's to accommodate the reality of how many people are living in bodies that are over a large. Like, at some point then you haven't defined large correctly if you have to have 5 X's of them. Likewise, small, if you have to have an X, if you have to have 2 X's on small, you're also not correctly defining a small. So there is that aspect of it, but just from a purely utilitarian standpoint, it is so confusing to see. I've literally seen patterns that say they go up to a 5X and then their largest size is like 50 inches, which would normally be like a 2X in the standard, sizing in the US. So anyway, all that to say, I just think it's unhelpful, and I really wish people would just like get away from that, because we can't make mainstream clothing brands do it, but we can do that within the knitting community if we chose to, and I think we should choose to do that. Okay, and I'll get into this more probably when I talk about specific designers, because I feel like I've already been talking for a long time, longer than I thought I would. I do just want to mention that there is like a range of how well designers meet these standards. There's the range of like, they're not interested in meeting the standards, they have made that clear, or they're like not trying to do that, either because they have fat phobia. In some cases, it's because they are based in countries where they're not it seems at least there's not as many large body people, and that is not the primary market that they're trying to address. So I don't know. Like, there are some people who are just like, have checked out of the conversation. Totally. They're less what I'm worried about, because it's like, okay, whatever. Like, at some point I kind of get the energy of like, I'm not for you, you're not for me, like, let's just go separate ways. The group that I think are most frustrating are people who inconsistently or begrudgingly try to be somewhat size inclusive. Like, they meet parts of the standard but not others. They do it on some patterns but not others. That's the one that I think is the most susceptible to being changed, and where I think probably efforts are best spent if we're trying to get more people to be inclusive. I will say that if I learn from various social media things, either a TikTok or, you know, a viral post, or I see something on the Craftsnark Reddit or whatever, if I happen across something that makes it clear to me that you're like, God, fatties, here you go, I hope you're happy now. Okay, that means that I don't want to knit from you anymore, because like, I don't need that. Yeah, like, who life is short, there are plenty of patterns, as we talked about in my last hot takes video. There is very few unique patterns out there. I can probably find something similar, better, or, you know, comparable from somebody who doesn't seem so mad to have me in their customer base. That's where I think most change can be affected, I'll say. Then, you know, in the middle is people who I'd say are like solidly inclusive. They meet those two standards, they do it consistently, they are successfully performing that they, you know, have good intentions there. I think that's great. And then there are groups that go above and beyond. I would say things that are above and beyond include like extended fit options, people who include a lot of variety of bodies in their social media feed advertising, or even better, in the pattern photos themselves. People who go like really above and beyond in terms of the test knit process to like really try to get a variety of, like, you know, if they have 4 different bust shapings, they will get 4 different testers for a given size. Like, things like that to me are above and beyond. Those are obviously my favorite people to support, but like, not everybody's going to be there. And then I do want to mention that not every pattern, I was mentioning fit as being a above and beyond thing. I do want to mention though that there can be marketing reasons why pattern designers don't want to include too many fit options, especially if their primary target market is like a general knitting audience, or like maybe more like newer knitters, or knitters who are not looking to get into advanced techniques. I think actually, you know what, the thing I'm knitting right now is a good example of this. So the Tulsa Tee by Rebecca Clow, I would say inclusive pattern. It has bust start options. It has a baseline inclusive size range, but I think that Rebecca's goal for that I don't know this, but my guess is she were going to sit down and talk about like who her customer is for that pattern. It's a lot of new knitters, or knitters who are looking for like a quick basic tee. They're not looking to get into a ton of detail. I think that that is like a perfectly reasonable marketing approach for that pattern. This is the Weekday Tee by Amy Scher, and I think that she's going for a market of people who want a better fit and who are okay with some additional details. So there's some lace in the raglan on this one. Also, I haven't blocked this yet, so don't judge my tensioning yet. It also is cotton yarn, so we'll see what happens. I don't know. But anyway, she has more details in this. She has more like waist shaping fit options. She has horizontal bust starts. She gives you specific ways to like measure how you should pick which one. Like, I would say that this is an A+ inclusive pattern in the sense of like the options that it gives you to modify things. But I don't think that makes this a more I think it's okay that she has a different target customer than the Tulsa Tee does. That doesn't make one better or worse in terms of inclusivity than the other, I guess. Like, I guess on the surface, this is a more inclusive pattern, but I don't think, like, I think it's okay for there to be a range of people you're targeting with your patterns in terms of how much detail you want to give them, or like what you're going to ask them to do. I don't know if that makes sense, but I did just want to put that in as a caveat. Okay, last couple of thoughts, and then I will wrap this up. There's a lot of talk about like people not liking having to be inclusive on the pattern designer side. Like, either we get leaks from group chats, or I don't know. There are whiffs that there are people who, again, are sort of like, God, fatties, can't you just shut up? You gotta just clamp that down. being a knitting designer as a profession is pretty rad, but every single job has stuff that sucks about it. The goal is to find a job that has a really good ratio of things you like to things you don't like in it. And if you don't like the inclusivity part, just view it as a part of the job that's not your favorite, and honestly just move on. If you are looking to like every part of your job, unless, like, I can't think of a job that doesn't have downsides to it. Literally, any. So just mark it up to one of the things you don't like about your job and, like, honestly, just, like, get on with it. Nobody is entitled to a profession. So this whole, like, this gets into a whole cancel culture thing. I won't even go there. But, like, just, like, honestly, just, like, suck it up, buttercup. Like, we all got stuff, we all have things about our jobs that we don't like, but that we do because hopefully we have a job that the ratio of stuff we like or the benefits of that job outweigh the things that suck about it. And then to the consumer side, how to affect change. I mentioned this in my last video, but the most important people to support size inclusive designers are people who are straight sized. And that is because, honestly, for very similar reasons to why it's very important in the concealer analogy I brought up, for lighter people to support brands that have inclusive shade ranges, because they are purposefully excluding, like, a designer who is not size inclusive or is mixed in their size inclusivity does not give a shit about my business. They don't care what I think. So it really doesn't matter. They only care about the market that they are actually targeting. So in the terms of knitting patterns, that is straight sized people. And then in terms of concealer, in that analogy, it is light skinned people. I will say, as somebody who's extremely pale, I also find that concealer ranges that do a good job on their shade inclusivity tend to have better matches for me as a light skinned person. Dare I say a pale pasty ghost. So it behooves me to support those brands, but I also feel a moral obligation of, like, I don't want to support a company that has decided that darker skinned people just shouldn't be addressed in their market. Like, I don't like that. I think it's gross. I think it's weird. Again, selfishly, I also typically find that their lighter shades are either clown white or very yellow. So there's selfish reasons that I don't want to support it, but there is an underlying structural reason why I don't want to support a shade range that is not inclusive. And straight size people, that's the calculus you got to make, because you're the ones who they give a crap about what you think about these things. I would say also, people need to resist the urge to stan your faves, like, or fight battles on behalf of your favorite designers. They are fine. They don't know who you are. They are relying on your parasocial relationship with them to fight their battles for them. And you don't need to give them that energy. And they're grown-ups. They can take criticism. They will be fine. In these conversations, the whole, like, I don't know if people have actually said that there are death threats around this. Usually when internet discourse gets like this, the specter of death threats comes up. I saw somebody make a TikTok saying people should have to show those death threats, and I kind of agree. Because I don't always believe that they're there, or I don't believe that they're, like, actually scary ones. But, like, yeah, people should not be being vicious to each other over this topic in either direction. That's a granted thing, but, like, your favorite designer who's getting criticism is a grown-up and can take it, and they can choose to either live with that criticism and keep doing what they're doing, or to change what they're doing, not get that criticism anymore. It's really just that simple. And, like, you trying to white knight for them is unhelpful and inevitably leads you, whether you mean it or not, to saying things that are very fat phobic and not cool. And maybe you're fine with that. Maybe you kind of do have some internalized well, we all have internalized fat phobia, but maybe you have some crueler fat phobia lurking within you and you're okay expressing it. That I cannot address, but I would urge people to treat their favorite designer like a grown-up and let them make a business decision about if it's criticism that they want to take on board or not. And then my final thing is just to be curious. Like, there are lots of different bodied people out there with lots of different experiences. I've tried to be more open with the people in my life about the experiences I've had as a fat person, just to, like, I don't know, like, increase awareness about what it is like to live in a fat body in a world that hates fat people. And a lot of times they're really shocked by the things that are said and done to me that I've just kind of learned to live with. So I would encourage you to be curious about other people's experiences. I mentioned some books you could read. If you want to read some fiction that includes fat people just living their life in a positive way, that's great. Olivia Dade, if you like romance, I feel like she does a really good job of this. She has contemporary series, spoiler alert, that's a good one. And then she has a paranormal series she's working on right now that's really fun. The first one was rom-com, and the second one is The World's Okayest Oracle. So like, you know, reading narratives about fat people just being fat and being happy is a good way to, you know, enjoyably combat internalized fat phobia. You know, for all of its other faults, and there are other critiques we could make about having teeny tiny girls binge eating on the show, but I will say that Gilmore Girls has maybe like my favorite representation of a fat woman on TV in the character of Suki St. James. It's never an issue. She is talented and fabulous and lovely and living her life and is desirable. So like representations like that just show fat people being fat and it not being an issue is great. But yeah, get curious about other people's experiences. That's true in terms of different size bodies, but also, you know, different cultures, different religions, different socioeconomic backgrounds, all those things. Be curious. We live in a crazy world that has lots of interesting things happening in it. And the more curious you are, the more empathetic you will be. And maybe it's too Mr. Rogers or Miss Rachel of me, but the better place the world will be. So that's the bottom line. I've been talking so long. I cannot believe I talked this long about this. Hopefully I can edit this into something vaguely interesting. Let me know your thoughts. Please don't be fat phobic to me or other people in the comments, but you know, whatever. You can disagree with me. I'm a grown up. I can take it. How are we doing here? I think I want to say we're getting close, but we're not. I'm lying to myself. I still have so much more of this body to knit. God, stockinette is truly my downfall. Give me a complicated cable pattern any day. Good Lord. Oh, also, if you're looking for, I just realized this is we were talking about free patterns earlier. Audrey Borrego has, I think all of her patterns are size inclusive. I might be wrong about that. Many of them are, if not all, and they're free and they're great. I had so much fun making this. See, I flew through this thing even though it's a light fingering weight because I didn't get bored. A stockinette is my kryptonite. Okay, anyway, I gotta go. I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. Take care of yourself, your friends, your family, your community. Get curious about the people and the world around you. Hit the bell if you want to know when I'm going to post, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!